What a Friday, ladies and gentlemen. What a Friday. We originally were going to bring you guys a discussion between Dr. R.M. Huffman and Dr. Cy Garte on the evidence for evolution. Being a medical doctor, Dr. Huffman was on call, and unfortunately, he got called in to just save some people, and nothing major, nothing that had to wait or anything like that. But no, I'm just kidding. We appreciate him, at least being on par to have this discussion. We understand that in that industry that I guess it's not an industry, is it? Is that a horrible word to use for the medical profession? The profession.
He saves lives. I think that's more important than hanging out with us for a night. I can agree with that.
My brain is frazzled.
It has been hectic the last hour or two, yes.
Anyways, welcome to Non-Sequitur. I, of course, am Kyle, joined by Steve. And we have one of our favorite guests. He's been with us. I think it was the King Crocoduck discussion he was with us. But everybody responded to him well. It's a proof positive that theists and atheists can get along. We have Dr. Cy Garte with us tonight. And just to remind everybody, Dr. Cy Garte earned his PhD in biochemistry and his Bachelor of Science in chemistry from City University of New York. He was a professor of public health and environmental health sciences at New York University, Rutgers, and the University of Pittsburgh. In addition to over 200 scientific publications in genetics, molecular epidemiology, am I saying that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Cancer research and other areas. He is the author of 4 books and articles in perspective, science and Christian faith, and God and nature. Dr. Garte, it is a pleasure to have you back with us tonight.
Yep,
how have you been?
Back.
Thank you. I've been well, and happily I decided not to even apply to medical school, so I don't have the problems that Dr. Huffman has.
Yeah. The things that he was saying he was getting ready to go into I couldn't even pronounce. So I just assumed that they're.
And I couldn't even imagine
really
getting a PhD. I know a couple people. There's a couple names that come to mind, but people that have gotten a PhD that have gone back and then get an MD. I couldn't even imagine how many years of schooling that would take.
Yeah. So real quick, just so everybody, before we get into a conversation, just so everybody's aware, we are waiting on True Empiricism. He said he was going to be a little late because of some things he had going on, but we are actually waiting on True. So True, if you by chance are listening to this, we are actively awaiting your arrival. I think Steve has put out a request to you, and so have I. So as soon as you see that, please come in so we can get rolling. But Steve?
Yeah, 15 minutes ago, he gave me his Skype address to add. I've added, and also Kyle has added. If you are listening, please add us both, but contact Kyle because that way he can add you the phone call a little bit easier than I can at the moment because I am producing this and streaming. So just let us know because we know that you have in real life stuff that you have to take care of, but that was about a half hour ago. So hopefully you can join us at some point here.
Yeah, and Dr. Garte, I'm going to let you kind of catch us up with what's been going on with you, and I believe you had some remarks that you wanted to make before we actually got started. So I'm going to let you kind of take that and fill us in.
Okay. Well, as Kyle said already, I'm a retired scientist. I was an academic researcher for many decades, and then I spent about 6 years at the National Institute of Health as an administrator, retired 3 years ago now, and have been devoting what I do now to the issue of science and faith, specifically Christian faith, and I have a number of activities in that regard. I recently became the editor of the online magazine called God and Nature, which is put out by the American Scientific Affiliation, ASA, which is the oldest American organization of scientists who are Christians. They have about 3,000 members. And that's a new responsibility that I've taken on in the last month or two to edit that magazine.
Is somebody building furniture here? Sounds like somebody's putting together a bookcase.
It could be me.
Don't hear
it. Oh, did we get a hold of True? Is that him coming in right now?
I sent the link out, so maybe he did accept.
Okay, because I'll have to.
Anyway, go ahead, Dr. Garte,
yeah.
and when he comes in, we'll break through.
Yeah. So anyway, I can plug that a little more later, maybe at the end. So I, just to set the stage for tonight's discussion, I began life as a atheist. That was the dominant, I would say, belief system of my parents. They were very, very militant atheists, and I grew up with that perspective and stayed an atheist through my youth. I became after studying science and learning some things, I became a little bit skeptical about my atheistic views, some of them, and I think I would probably call myself an agnostic for a number of decades. And then through a number of things, which I won't go into now, I eventually embraced Christianity in my middle age and was eventually baptized, actually not long ago, about 6 years ago, I was baptized finally. And I now consider myself to be a devout Christian. I attend church regularly. I'm in the leadership of my church, and I completely accept the Apostle and Nicene Creed. But I have never given up one part of my scientific worldview at the same time, and that includes the theory of evolution in biology, which I feel is the basic underlying theory of biological science. Not just me, most biologists, the great majority of biologists would agree with that. And I should also say at the outset, I mean, I would like it if True Empiricism were here to hear this, but it's a lot of people on Twitter, often on all sides, both atheists and Christians, sometimes express surprise that a scientist such as myself would be a fairly fervent Christian. And I don't understand the surprise, because holding to evolution is something I share with the entire Catholic Church, certainly the last several popes, with all the mainstream Protestant religions in the world and even in the United States. And I recently saw a poll, unfortunately I don't have it at my fingertips, that even among evangelicals, agreement with evolution is in the majority in American evangelicals. So I mean, it's not rare for Christians to hold to evolution, and I think the problem we have is that many creationists are so adamant in their views and so vocal about them that sort of there's a little bit of distortion as to how people feel about Christians and science. And the reality is, in fact, I think that the understanding that there's no real war between the two, that in fact they're totally compatible with each other, is catching on quite a bit, and will continue to do so, is my hope. And so my main goal in life at this point, and that includes my appearances at various debates and discussions online, is to explain to especially students who may be Christian and then who go to college or some other way find out that evolution is real and are told either both by their perhaps fundamentalist parents and their atheist professors, they're told the same thing. You have to choose one or the other. You can't be a Christian and also be a scientist, and that's simply false. So that's the message that I really want to convey to the public. That may have been an idea from many years ago, but it's simply false.
Why is it that you think? Let me ask you this question. I know this is a little off subject, but while we're waiting on True, we're going to get Mel in here because I think she had some questions she wanted to ask you to pick your brain. But why do you think you're seeing such a surge in? It's almost like the creationist argument is coming back with a vengeance a little bit, and also with flat Earth. You're getting, you're just getting these ridiculous claims coming back in full force. What do you think the driving factor for that would be?
I am totally mystified by flat Earth, and I don't even know what to say. So I'm going to leave that one. In terms of young Earth creationism, I think what many Christians feel, and I don't have any argument with their theology. I mean, I do have some argument. I don't agree with their theology, but I don't think there's any problem with a Christian believing in the theology of young Earth and the theology of a very specific interpretation of Scripture. Everybody has their own interpretations of Scripture. I think that's one of the purposes of Scripture. There's not supposed to be one right answer. And their particular answer is something that I think many of them incorporate into their general worldview. And I think they feel threatened because they see that many young people are leaving the church. That's well known. Everybody agrees with that. And their answer to that is because people like me are coming in and diluting the true message of the Bible. My view is that young people are leaving the church because of many reasons, one of which is that in their experience, and I know there are many people on Twitter who've gone through this, in their experience, the church has denied the reality of mainstream science, and they don't deny it. They find it's convincing and compelling. And when they're told that they have to choose one or the other, they leave the church. Now, that's not the only reason. There are many other reasons. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a trend in that direction. And there's also, as I mentioned, a trend among Christians who don't have any intention of leaving the church to question the whole issue of, what is called a literal interpretation of Scripture, but I don't call it literal because it is not literal. And that's another discussion, which we don't have to have now. But that particular interpretation of Scripture is what should define all truth. And, Georgia Purdom, who is a very good biochemist, molecular biologist, geneticist works for the Answers in Genesis. In a debate she had with a friend of mine named Dennis Venema, who's like me, an evolutionary creationist, she actually said that, because she was asked what evidence would convince you to change your mind, and she said, I don't look at the evidence, I look at Scripture, and then I interpret everything according to Scripture. Now, the reason I don't like that approach is because I strongly believe that God's revelation to us came in two forms. It's called a two-book theology. The book of words, which is the Bible, and the book of works, which is nature. And those two books, those two methods of revelation obviously don't always agree. And I believe that if they don't agree, it means we're probably getting one or both, usually both, wrong. And I think what we have to do is work very hard in both science and in scriptural interpretation, in theology, to find where the real truth is. And it's not easy. And people who say you just read the Bible and what it says goes, I think they're really not being very good to God, because, look how complex the natural world is. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievably complex. If you believe, as I do, that that's God's work, why would you believe that he wrote a book that should be read like an auto repair manual?
Okay, I have a few questions. First of all, hello.
Hello, Mel.
Hi,
nice
Mel.
Camera.
Thank you. I have a new camera, so it's awesome. It does better with color.
Mel. I know her quite well. I don't know if she's ever seen me, but I've seen her many times online.
Everybody knows Mel.
Everybody knows Mel. That's
He liked
true.
the food episode.
Oh, wow.
Look at that. You're infamous, Mel, already.
Oh, awesome. And related to the food episode, I just posted a recipe on black eyed pea hummus, Kyle.
Interesting. Look, as long as it's not humans, like we got off to last time, I'm fine with
discussion on that.
black beans.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so I have a few questions for you, Cy. First of all, how are you this evening?
So far, so good.
Give it a few more minutes. Awesome. It'll change. No kidding.
Yes, it sounds like the weather. If you don't like the weather, that's okay. Stick around. It's bound to change pretty quickly with our current climate situation. So you were talking, okay, I'm curious to know what aspects of the Bible do you think are literal? Because clearly, being a person that is both a scientist and a creationist, I do have quite a bit of questions in regards to that. Not necessarily that they have to be at odds, because I do know scientists that actually have fundamentalist Christian backgrounds, and they try to take a lot of science and kind of bend it to fit a little bit of their perspective in regards to creation. So what aspects do you feel of the Bible is literal? What is it that you're taking from that and that you hope science can kind of explain? Because because there's a lot of different Christians that take very literal aspects of the Bible, and it's quite difficult for me. First of all, which version of the Bible are we talking about? Are we going to incorporate Dead Sea Scrolls? Are we going to incorporate the Nag Hammadi? Are we going to incorporate Gnostic texts? What about the mystical books of Moses? Which aspects of Christianity are we actually going to take and apply? Did I drop out?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. So that's my question to you is, there's so much contradictory information in the Bible, especially when the Bible was put together, and we have all of these other texts. Have you ever read the Nag Hammadi? That's another question.
Am I adding another window here?
I think
there is
True's here.
Oh, okay. Then we add another window. Continue.
Oh, that's what it is. Okay. Yeah, because I see a blank window. Okay. Well, that was a very simple question, Melody. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I have several more, so I just figure we'll get started. We'll just get started on the easy stuff, and then we'll go from there. Okay. I'm trying to figure out a bit more about you and your belief system and what you take as literal and that sort of thing, so I can kind of pick your brain a bit.
Well, I take the New Testament as literal. I think, but what's interesting about the New Testament is that when you read it, you find out that the star character in the New Testament, Jesus Christ, almost never spoke literally. Almost everything he said was in the form of a parable. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be really extreme and say that every word of the Bible, which includes the New Testament, must be taken as it says, well, then all the parables of Jesus have to be taken literally, which clearly nobody does.
Well, but they're called the parables of Jesus, so you know that they're not to be taken literally. That's what I'm saying. There's a clear, exactly. Understanding. And he uses, if you look at the English version where they've translated, it's like, this is like that. This is similar to that. Parables are not literal. Right. And so exactly. I'm not concerned with that. We know that Jesus was a teacher, and he often used metaphors and parables. So,
the reason I brought that up is because as a Christian, I also believe Jesus was God. And if God incarnated, as I believe, as a man and came to speak to us and teach us on earth, and he used parables so often, that seems to me that God has a preference for teaching us the truth in stories and parables.
Well, I understand that. I actually used to be an educator, so I would use a lot of metaphors and things like that. It's a good way to teach.
Right.
But the thing is, if you're saying, Jesus is full God, I would see Jesus as half God because he did have a human mother. So
Right.
if we're going to get kind of
Well,
technical here,
that's theological. I mean, I have a different. Christians consider Jesus Christ to be fully God and fully human. Now, how that works logically or scientifically, the answer is it doesn't. So, it's a theological.
Let me stop you guys real quick. Let me
Sure.
True, are you with us?
And just real quick, I have Mel and I
There we go.
have Kyle sharing the same window. I hope you guys don't mind. You guys look cute together, by the way. Seriously.
Yeah, Kyle wants to be my gay husband.
Yeah, so I just throw you guys together since he's your gay husband. You guys don't mind sharing window real quick, do you?
No,
I will any day. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do now. We're gonna table the questions that we've got going on right now. First of all, hello, True. Thank you for coming in. I think we're gonna fix the windows real quick. Mel, we're actually gonna put you in the middle, over top of where the nun is. But for
okay.
For the kind of until we get to the end of the conversation, we're gonna kind of hang back and let True and Cy talk about evolution and the lack of or proof for that. So True, once again, thank you for coming in. I'm gonna actually we'll let True. You can start us out by kind of outlining why you feel that evolution is not true or not, or your evidence for creation, whichever avenue that you want to go, and then we'll let Dr. Cy kind of respond to whichever direction that you decide to go on that.
Okay. Well, first of all, can you guys hear me? Okay, because I'm on my phone.
There you go.
Okay. If we're going to say the word evolution, I think we should be careful with it. I think that evolution is a fact. Change happens. And to what extent, I think that my issue is with evolutionists is that they determine how they determine evolution. I think it's a bit subjective. So if we're going to talk about new traits being able to be developed, I think that is legit. I think that there is science to back that up, like the ability to digest myelinase, mutations that can develop new traits. We're going to talk about new features being developed inside of an organism, new anatomical features. I would have an issue with that. So my issue with evolution is I believe that evolution is a fact. Change happens, but it seems that there's a burden of proof that evolutionists have not met and justify how far those changes can go.
Okay, Dr. Garte?
Okay, I have to say that the sound was a little hard for me to get all of it, so I might have missed some of your comments. So you're saying evolution is a fact, because it's change, and that change happens. Is that, do I get that right? Because
I'm sorry, I'm a little closer. Is this a little better?
You still kind of sound a little distant there. Let me see.
Let me see what I can do about it. Give me 1 second, okay?
Okay. I just want to comment. I apologize, ladies and gentlemen, right now that I look like an Oompa Loompa in the corner of the.
You're not origin green though. It's okay.
My head is like as you could land an F-16 on my forehead in this video.
That's not on my end. That's your camera. I'm only shaping the window. I can't really control your color.
Yeah.
I'm very narrow, so it's okay. You've made me quite center. Thank you, Kyle.
I think I got people.
It's Friday, man. I mean, like I said.
Oh, now somebody it's changed. Now my whole layout's messed up again.
Did we lose True?
I don't know. I think he might have popped off and popped on again.
Maybe he's refreshing. Well, this is a good time while we kind of regroup here. This is a good time for me to tell you guys about, because I didn't do it at the beginning, because once again I'm absolutely frazzled. The shows that we have coming up this week. Tomorrow we are having Dr. DiMattei joining us again for some more contradictions of the Bible. These will focus on social norms that existed back then that people still try to apply to today that don't exactly line up and why they don't. That will be at 8 o'clock tomorrow. Sunday, we have Dr. Joshua Bowen joining us again. He is a scholar of Sumerian text and linguistics. We're going to be talking about the gods of Babylon on Sunday. And then on Monday is Ask a Satanist. We have
I love that.
Darren
Ask a Satanist. That's a great title.
It is. Well, I mean, it's true. Darren will be joining us from the Church of Satan, and you can tweet your questions at NonSequitur Show, and we will ask him on Monday. So I was hoping that by the time I got to the end of that, we would be ready to go.
Yeah, I'm trying to control 5 to 1,000 different things at once, so I'm just doing the windows
Well,
right now.
I can start to answer what I think the question was, and I think possibly what True was getting at was that it's a good idea to define evolution, and I think that's true. That's a good point. I mean, it's important to define evolution because a lot of people have slightly different definitions of it. But there is a biological science definition of evolution, which is fairly technical.
Go this way. I'm trying to get.
Mel, I got you. Just stay still. Stay
You
still.
have
I
no
got
control.
you, girl. I've done this before. There you go. I got you. Look at that. Beautiful. You look better than Kyle right now. Okay, so.
What about me? Can I get some more hair on my head there, please, Steve?
You know what? I might be able to do some photoshopping.
Here, I'll put it over on the other side.
Yeah, there you go. On the other side. There you go. Lean this way, Cy, and you have like a nice full red head of hair.
Put it on your head. Yeah. There we go.
Thank you.
I have a lot of it. You're welcome. It's red. It doesn't match your beard, but
if you're listening, True, come. Try it again. Let's try to.
If I could superimpose your hair on his head right now, that would have been awesome. But,
yeah. Just
what is happening right now?
Just go with
what
it.
Is happening
yeah,
right now?
We're so down the rabbit hole.
We can carry on and wait till he comes back because I do have questions.
Well, Dr. Garte was actually in.
Let me finish my definition because I think that's important. I mean, there's a lot of things that evolution is not. That's many people think it is. It says the theory of evolution, which started with Darwin and then progressed over the 20th century with many additions, is about how the diversity of life arose from common ancestor and led to all the animals and plants that we see today. It does not have anything to do with the origin of life. That's a separate area, which does not really coincide with biological evolution. Biological evolution is a very specific mechanism that actually really only occurs, as far as we know, in biology. So we talk about the evolution of cell phones and the evolution of galaxies, and that's change, but it does not operate according to the mechanism that operates in biological entities, which is
we have molecular evolution on the molecular level. When you look at viruses, when you look at bacteria, you can see evolution occur on the molecular level where you have the genetic changes. So you can see that. So there's varying aspects of evolution
that's still biological.
Well, yeah, evolution is biological for the most part. But even then, when we're starting, are you talking about Are you talking about like an organism as a whole, or are you talking about the molecular aspects of it when you're just saying evolution?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, certainly the mechanism of evolution involves genetics and biochemistry, and cell biology. But yeah, it involves every aspect of biological science, which is why it's a fundamental theory.
I think for this discussion, I think everybody would agree if we just said evolution in this context is going to mean biological evolution for a change of allelic frequency. I think everybody agrees with that.
Right. No that's the technical definition.
Yes, it doesn't explain the origin of life.
Right, and I think that's more the question that I think True wants to address. True is fine with the fact that evolution occurs in population. He's not one of those people that says, "Whoa."
So True, let's check your mic real quick.
So somebody doing origami?
True, are you with us?
Yeah, I have my sonic screwdriver and try to fix it.
That's what it sounds like.
But actually. I don't think. Yeah, it's not working. I'm sorry.
Can you hear us, True?
I don't hear him.
I'm
He's in the
so
call, though, I
lost right
think.
now.
Yeah, I hear a dog.
True.
Is that from his mic?
It's got to be.
Okay. He does have a dog.
Oh goodness.
Lord.
Shenanigans abound.
Sai, this is a good opportunity for you to call me out like you were like you wanted to do earlier, because I'm thinking about having to resort to that again.
Okay. So when we first found out that Dr. Huffman was not
can
able,
you guys hear me?
Yeah. It's a little
Yeah.
clipping though. Your gain sounds a little high.
Okay.
Test it real quick, True, and then we're gonna let Sai call me out, and then you two can finish or start your discussion.
Okay, how's that? Is that
Better. Yeah,
That's better.
very good,
Perfect.
very good.
Okay, Sai, call me out, and then you can respond to True's opening statement.
Okay, so what happened was that when Dr. Huffman first announced that he had been called into this emergency surgery operation and couldn't make it, he did give us a list of names of some people he thought might be able to fill in. And this was all on a Twitter discussion, a DM or a Facebook, whatever. And I will report now, because Kyle has given me permission, that Kyle answered, I think I'm going to have to actually pray for something to work out. And now, since we have something worked out, I mentioned to Kyle that his prayers have been answered.
Yep,
So
he got me.
I will see you in church on Sunday, and
well, we'll see about that, sir. We'll see. We will see about that. But yes, I did say that, and my prayers were apparently answered. So, okay, we left off last with True wanting to, I believe, make a definitive or put a definition to what evolution actually is. And True, did you hear any of what Dr. Garte was saying after you got kicked out? Or not kicked out, but you dropped out.
No, I didn't. If we're going to say, I think that's a little bit of a different question. If we're going to say that changes in allele frequencies over time is what is defined as evolution, I'd have no problem with that. But what I have a problem with is that out of every article I've read regarding evolution, out of every scientist I've been in contact with over email trying to understand this stuff, I've realized that there is not a single article out there that defends the notion that change over time, if we're going to describe evolution as change over time, can account for many distinctive anatomical features that we find inside of the cell. Meanwhile, many of those anatomical features that we observe inside of the cell, and we have people in this room that already know where I'm going to go with this, ATP synthase and so on, many machines inside of the cell, they have patterns that are unique, that have only been observed coming from intelligent agents. So this is the inferiority of evolutionary theory as I see it. I know you guys can hear those pups.
Okay, I just want to. Okay, they're puppies. They're not screaming women, because I wasn't sure what was going on. I was like, is there like a torture chamber going in there or something? Okay, so they're puppies. Okay.
Okay, so Dr. Garte, you want to take that from there?
Yeah, I mean, this may be a short debate, because if you accept that evolution is change in allele frequency with time in a population, then we're in agreement. In terms of the characteristics of the first common ancestor, the last universal common ancestor, which includes a lot of things like ribosomes and all these very complex things that go on in cell, that's really, we don't have any real knowledge of how they came to be, and that's part of the origin of life. And evolution, it's a little bit, it's not a great analogy, but I like to use the analogy of the Big Bang. I mean, we don't know what happened before the Big Bang in physics, and we really don't know what happened before the origin of the first, complete cell. The difference is that probably something did happen, and we just don't know it. But it's whatever it was very, very complicated, very difficult, and it's not part of evolutionary theory. So if we start with that first cell, which included all of the complex mechanisms such as ATP synthase and all the other complex mechanisms that are in all living cells, then what would be your objection to the evolutionary mechanism of inherited variation followed by natural selection?
I would say that happens.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wouldn't have any problem with that. But even if we don't talk about abiogenesis or the origins of life, the origins of the first cell, I'd still have issues with systems that are necessary for a thriving cell to occur after you get an established system, whether or not the mechanisms of evolution can account for that system. So my issue isn't only abiogenesis. My issue is whether or not evolution on its own can account for systems that are needed for life, or whether there's varying systems within the confines of different domains of life, whether it be eukaryotic cells, prokaryotic cells. That's what's important to me. So it's not just abiogenesis, it's whether or not the mechanisms of evolution actually have the creative ability to produce specific systems.
Okay. I mean, that's a very good point and a very good question. And in fact, it's a question that evolutionary biologists have been asking, well, not all of them, but many of them for some time, because, for example, the idea that natural selection is not creative, right? Natural selection does not innovate, is actually something that most evolutionary biologists will agree with. And it's been a question for a long time as to how you get, rapid changes, for example, in new phyla, or just, things that don't seem to follow the original Darwinian idea, which was very, very slow accumulation of point mutations followed by selection. And, the first idea came from Stephen Jay Gould, which was, well, actually not from him, but he pretty much promoted it, was the idea of punctuated equilibrium, that it appears that evolution does not proceed in a constant, slow fashion, but stays very stable for long periods of time, and then somewhere in some groups of species, in some clades, you get an explosive change, very rapid, and nobody understood how that could work. What's very exciting, at least to me, is that in the last few decades, maybe the last decade actually, there's actually been a lot of revolutionary thought in evolutionary biology, and what some people call the neo-Darwinian modern synthesis, which is that evolution is simply random mutation, usually point mutations in structural genes, followed by natural selection, is probably not sufficient to explain the diversity of life. And many evolutionary biologists, and I can name them if necessary, but have been working on some really interesting theories that, first of all, one of the effects of these theories is they kind of take away the random nature of evolution. They are now proposing things like niche construction, which has to do with not just that the environment acts on the animal or the organism, but the organism acts on the environment, which then feeds back and acts again as natural selection on the organism. So what's happening is that modern evolutionary biology is getting extremely complex, which is good, because the simple version that it's all genes and you get a mutation in a gene and then it changes the genotype and the phenotype and then you get selection, that's too simplified, and it wasn't really very explanatory. So I think what's very important is for everyone, including and especially Christians, to look at some of these new developments in evolutionary biology, and what you'll find is that they're answering a lot of the questions that people have raised about how evolution actually can work.
Well, then I have a question for you then.
Sure.
Is there an example that you can provide us?
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned the ATP synthase. I always go to the ATP synthase because of this reason. I think it's a simple topic for people to understand. I think it's, when you talk about DNA, you get into a lot of different information theories, Shannon information and so on, and it confuses the topic. But I think the ATP synthase is a straightforward, object for us to look at. Is there an example out there for something as complex as the ATP synthase? The mechanisms of, I'm sorry.
No, I am thinking of an example. It's actually far more complex than the ATP synthase, and that is the, let's see, did I do this, or the screen is going crazy? Is that just me, or is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's behind the scenes. You're good.
Okay. And that is the origin of mammalian pregnancy, which is an incredibly complex development, which occurred obviously at the origin of mammals. And it involves a tremendous number of cellular and developmental and genetic changes, sorry, to deal with all the things that go on in pregnancy, which, didn't exist before mammals, at least mammalian pregnancy. Obviously, there was pregnancy, but I'm talking about the live birth mammalian system, which involves, live birth and feeding, etc. So what happened? How did that occur? And the answer is it occurred not by slow progressive accumulation of random mutations, because that would be impossible. And so in some ways, this is a little bit like your ATP synthase example. But
I don't think that, maybe I should clarify what it is that my issue is. And this is the reason why I was bringing it up as I was earlier. The issue is the pattern. The pattern is what I think is unique. You see, because we can talk about things that are complex, and I think the issue of what is complex becomes a subjective topic. But if we're talking about a certain system that, based on our uniform experience, has come from an intelligent agent, and we're talking about something specific. So when I'm looking at the ATP synthase, I'm looking at those 10 to 15 different protein subunits that spin on the top of the shaft, and NADH dehydrogenase and all these complex protein structures that are embedded along that mitochondrial matrix. I'm seeing a system that's very simple, similar to like a water water turbine or Pelton turbine of some kind, where there's steam or water producing mechanical energy for electrical energy in the long run. So it's not the same thing. You're dealing with a proton motive force, but the parts tend to be the same across the board, and the overall function and purpose seems to be the same. So if I'm looking at a system like that, my question is, does the mechanisms of evolution, based on our uniform experience, based on tests in the laboratory, have there ever been tests showing that the mechanisms of evolution can account for a system like this? Now, based on what I've seen, there are articles out there that are published to try to compare homologies, like the type 3 secretory system or the hexameric helicases or something like that, to compare structures that might appear similar, and then they'll declare similarities indicating maybe a common ancestor of some kind. This doesn't show me that there is that creative ability of evolution to build these structures. I can look at these different structures and use my imagination, seeing, well, they could have come from one another, but I don't have that real open world demonstration like I do with intelligent design. I mean, I can go back and say, all right, with intelligent agents, we have observed intelligent creators building turbines. So as I look inside of the system, inside of nature, I can use my abductive reasoning to come to a conclusion that this might have also been the end result of an intelligent agent as well. I don't seem to be able to do that with evolutionary theory, as to say, well, the mechanisms can't account for this system. It seems like there are mechanisms posited, and comparing certain systems that might look similar to it, but from there on, there's no science. I have to use my imagination to connect dots.
Well, can I finish with my example? Because I think I will get to that answer. It turns out that what happens in pregnancy evolution, the evolution of pregnancy, which was a sudden change, rapid change, is we know that in many of the systems that are involved in pregnancy, all of these occurred at one time, because what happened was a retrotransposon inserted itself into a regulatory region, turned off several genes and turned on several other genes because of the disruption of the regulatory sequences, and we ended up in one shot with one mutational event. Now, of course, a retrotransposon insertion is not what many people think of as a mutation, but it is a mutation. And what we had in one shot was a major change in the developmental profile of a bunch of genes that were involved in, for example, endometrial formation and other things that were required for pregnancy. So we do have genetic data that explains the development of several. That's one example. There are many other systems like that. In terms of the ATP synthase, that's present in all cells, right? Can you know any cells that do not have that system? I believe it's present in all cells. So what we're talking about here.
You're right. I think in like eukaryotic cells, I think it's
right.
located differently.
I mean, they're
prokaryotic cells,
but we don't know many cells that lack it. Because all living cells operate with ATP, and it's extremely difficult to make ATP from ADP. And the purpose, just to fill in the audience who don't know this, the purpose of the rotating mechanism is to actually push adenosine diphosphate. Probably Melody can explain this better, but to push adenosine diphosphate onto another phosphate and make adenosine triphosphate. And that ATP molecule is the source of all energy for all cells. So it's really a vital, critical mechanism, pretty much like ribosomes and DNA producing messenger RNA, which then goes to the ribosome and codes for proteins, is present in all cells. And as I said before, we don't know how that original cell, which is incredibly complex to begin with, formed. And in another discussion, I would probably be completely on your side and agree that a natural basis for abiogenesis really has a huge burden of proof because of all the things that have to have happened. But I would rather, go ahead.
Well, I mean, this is the reason why I'm bringing it up, because I talk about ATP synthase a lot because I understand its complexity. I think it's a simple topic to understand, and I think it's a straightforward topic. But I feel like, I mean, this is the reason why intelligent design, when I compare it to evolution, I can always say that evolution can account for traits, because that happens. I mean, the MC1R gene mutations that cause it right here, that's fact, that happens. The ability to digest myelinase and many other mutations that develop new traits, that's true, that happens. But it seems to me, if we're going to be dealing with systems like this, based on our uniform experience, the only explanation that we have, and it's not opinion, it's not belief or religious faith, the only rational position to hold to that can account for this system is an intelligent agent producing these things. And just to clarify, because the ATP synthase, as you mentioned, I mean, it's the ATP synthase is necessary for many other systems inside of the cell as well, right? Signal transduction, where you have ligands docking with the G protein, and then it changes its shape to release alpha helices. It needs an ATP to drop two phosphates to make a monophosphate. I mean, with brain functions and neurons that flare back and forth, and how those neurons interact with different astrocytes, ATP is necessary for chemical interactions as well. So ATP is an extreme, you already mentioned that ATP synthase is present in most cells, right? It's maybe placed in different locations, but the end product of ATP synthase is, we're adding that additional phosphate in the catalytic core is needed for many, many different processes. So, I mean, this is a problem, not just abiogenesis. That's why I said earlier, evolution itself seems to need to account for multiple different, very, very complex systems to be there at once in order for you to even have an established cell. And to me, evolution doesn't do that. It's a gradual process that's supposed to take millions of years before you can get such complex systems. Everything's not supposed to be there at once.
Okay, well, I mean, I've already said this, but I think what we have to discuss is what happens after we have the initial cell, which is often called LUCA, the last universal common ancestor. That's where evolution begins. When we start with that cell, how do we get from there to us, to a human, to an elephant, to an oak tree? And that process, okay, all of which have all the basic complex. I agree with you that it's very complex, and I agree that the origin of life is a mystery. I really do agree with that. But what I think we're talking about tonight is where do we go from that original LUCA cell, which all of the cells are derived from? How do we get to animals with nervous systems, with eyes, with wings? How do we get to trees with leaves? All of which are new, and innovative structures that, and the question is, are you saying that those are also not explainable by evolution, or I'm sorry to take you away from ATP synthase, but I think there's nothing else we can say about
Real
that.
quick, if I can ask a question.
Well, I mean,
wasn't LUCA a population, not a cell?
Yeah, when I say a cell, I meant a population of
Okay,
cells.
just clarification.
Well, even going there.
But we don't know that, actually. We don't even know. We don't even know that. I think it was probably a population.
Well, I mean, even going there with what you're saying, I mean, the issue remains the same. I'm not just trying to talk about ATP synthase. I think ATP and its end product with the ATP synthase, I think it leads on to many interdependent, complex systems.
Sure.
That's why I'm bringing it up. But that's not really what's important to me. It's really any feature that, from an ID perspective, we can look at and draw an inference from. It doesn't just have to be the ATP synthase. It can be the brain itself. The brain is typically compared to a computer system because the way that it processes information. But there's obviously disagreement among neurologists. They don't like that comparison, but there's an argument that can be made there, and I would have no problem arguing that from an ID perspective. But just going on what you're saying, the first population of complex cells. I mean, how is it that an evolutionist would actually deal with that? I mean, you look at the 88% of the fossil record, for example, the Precambrian era, we don't really know a lot about. We see some fauna, some cyanobacteria, and some stray organisms in Precambria, but only 12% of the geological timescale we know a lot about. And most of what you see at the bottom, well, close to the bottom of the fossil record, the Cambrian, you see most of the complex organisms already there, the chordates, the echinoderms, and so on. So most of the phyla are there at the bottom of at the Cambrian era. Below that, you see no divergence of all these organisms coming to be. Now, you see some stray organisms where you can make some connections, but if we're going to talk about cells, as you were mentioning, below that, you're seeing cyanobacteria. There's no evidence at all, it seems like, in the fossil record or in biology that is showing us that we all originated from a common ancestor in the sense that there was an actual divergence from a cyanobacteria. There's a huge gap there, and even trying to smuggle in abiogenesis, it seems to me that abiogenesis is really not going on anything. I mean, to me, with evolution, there can be an argument that can be made. There can be a discussion that can be had with evolution because there's been over 150 years of research on this topic. But with abiogenesis, it's like there's a lot of pressure to make it true, but there's no evidence suggesting that it is actually true. So, I mean, if anybody wants to jump in that, go ahead. But that's what my position is.
Well, does Mel want to jump in real quick? She's in between them.
She looks
she's
like
awfully
she's ready.
Quiet. Mel,
I'm just sitting here listening to just people go back and forth here, and it's shocking to me that I think individuals here can't take into consideration that chemical reactions can happen, especially when you consider thermodynamics and how certain reactions happen, and especially when you're looking at living systems where you have enzymes that can lower that activation energy in order to pop that phosphate back on. You have things that can develop over time. Now, the thing is we don't in a lab have the time allotted to us to be able to replicate such a thing that takes a long period of time to see it develop like building blocks. We're talking millions of years here. But if you have all of the means, all of the organic molecules in a place to where they can interact with one another, thermodynamics is going to dictate we're going to have reactions, we're going to have an increase of entropy, we're going to have the increase of chaos, but we're also going to have reactions, and slowly over time we can develop these proteins that are going to generate the lowest energy conformation that's going to naturally occur within our laws, within our own natural laws. I mean, in my personal thoughts, I kind of default to Professor Brian Cox here. If you've not watched The Human Universe, it's freaking amazing. He goes through all of the current research associated with how humans developed from this common ancestor and branched out to become better at being human. We are the only apes that left the planet. But what we're looking at in regards to how these molecules can interact with one another, a living universe seems to be the only logical one, in that we can see we have molecules here in their lowest energy conformation. Now, this is my computational chemistry and physical chemistry talking. Living systems have to have this ATP going on. We have, and it naturally wants to pop off that phosphate, but we have enzymes that lower that activation energy to pop it back on. But that enzyme is also in its lowest energy conformation state to make it in that form. So why is it outside the realm of possibility that these particular molecules or these particular atoms over a long period of time would start to generate these molecules that have the lowest energy conformation, still increase entropy in some way, still fall within the laws of thermodynamics? It's completely within the realm of possibility. Now, if you want to say God did it that way, okay, but it's still possible to just say they automatically made ATP synthase in this way. They automatically made these enzymes in this way. When we know that chemical reactions happen, we look at the law slips. My general chemistry is leaving me, guys. It starts with a
Come
C.
back.
You have a biochemist in the room right here,
It's
so
just-
give him something to work with.
Le Chatelier's principle.
Le Chatelier's-
Le Chatelier's.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Le Chatelier's principle, where we're going to have reactions are going to go towards the best energy outcome possible. And over time, why wouldn't it make sense that these atoms would come together into the lowest conformation shape that they could have, to where they work with one another? We have increase in entropy. We have all of these things happening. They later develop into investing energy into coding in the form of RNA. And we know RNA we believe with evidence that RNA is the earliest form of genetic code. We know it has a short half-life, but over time we can see that little oxygen, pops off and we get a more stable molecule. I mean, for everything that I've learned in physical chemistry with my computational chemistry, seeing how these proteins react in different solutions, what the lowest energy state is, all of this, it's not a stretch for me. It makes complete and total sense that this can happen over an exceedingly long period of time. And why wouldn't a living universe be the only kind of universe we would have? I mean, it just.
Well, I mean,
hold on one second. True. Let's let Dr. Garte piggyback on that, and then I'll let you respond back to that. Just kind of hold that just 1 second.
That was actually Cy was responding.
What's that?
Oh, Cy was responding, and I think.
Yes, I was responding.
Yeah.
So I would very much like to do this again as a debate with Melody on abiogenesis, because I understand what you're saying, but there's a lot of holes in it. And just to give you one, you're talking about enzymes, which are incredible catalysts, and they do make energy. They do lower the energy barrier and allow reactions to occur. But how do we get enzymes
together?
The question is how do we?
Yes.
The question is how do we get enzymes, which are proteins?
Is this like a chicken and egg problem that the proteins
Well,
create the enzymes? Because there could have been other enzymes earlier.
Let Dr. Garte finish.
Yeah,
his thought,
I am having a hard time finishing. It's true.
Just let him finish his thought.
There's a theory that before, as Melody said, that before there were enzymes, before there were proteins, there was RNA, which can act as an enzyme, as a ribozyme, and can do both replication and catalysis. But the problem is, and the problem gets very technical, is that ribozymes are not very good catalysts, and RNA is very bad at self-replication. We just found that out about a few months ago. But I don't want to get into all the heavy details of that here, except to say that energy and the idea that there are natural directions for chemicals to go is correct, but it is far from sufficient in explaining how a cell with a protein, excuse me, synthesis mechanism can arise from what? From just random chemical reactions. As you know, random chemical reactions occur very rarely and very slowly. So without protein enzyme catalysts, very little chemistry actually goes on. And also, the other thing about enzymes, of course, is they also can drive reactions in the wrong direction. They can actually drive reactions that are not favorable, and that's required for life. And the way they do that is by using ATP and by using various other tricks that are pretty much restricted to enzymes, to proteins. So
Yeah,
it is a lot more complex than just physical and computational chemistry.
Yes,
because it's a lot going on in life that is not explainable by physical chemistry.
I have a question.
I understand. Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Can I ask? Oh, well, do you want to go first? 'Cause I have a quick question.
Go.
Why are all enzymes have to be proteins when there are enzymes that are non-protein? Like ribozymes?
Yeah, the enzymes that are not proteins are not. They're not. We call them ribozymes. Right. They're made out of RNA, or they're a combination of RNA and protein.
But wouldn't that have been the catalyst back then?
Yeah, they can catalyze. Even today, modern cells have a ribozyme as part of the protein synthesis machinery, which probably came back from some kind of RNA world. They may have been an RNA world, but the problem is that ribozymes, RNA enzymes, simply cannot do. They can catalyze some reactions to some extent, but they don't have the versatility or the efficiency by orders of magnitude that proteinaceous enzymes have. So you can't explain modern life until you can explain the origin of proteins. Now, this is a well-known problem. I mean, everybody working on origin of life knows about this and is trying to understand how that could have happened. And I'm not saying it could not have happened. I would never say that because I don't know what could or could not happen. It's just that we are very, very far from understanding how it happened. And the thing that's really crazy is that it appears that life appeared on Earth very early in Earth's existence, within a few 100 million years, and very, very quickly after the end of the Great Bombardment at the beginning, when the Earth was extremely hot. So that's actually a fairly short period of time, and especially when you compare it to the amount of time that it took for evolution to produce a multicelled organism, which was about 2.5 billion years. So, the origin of life happened very fast, and then very little happened except lots of single-cell organisms evolving for 2.5 billion years. And then in the last 500 million years, we had all the rest of evolution. So,
exactly.
The origin of life is a very difficult question. It's simply not physical chemistry. That doesn't that gets us to the beginning.
I wasn't just saying physical chemistry. I'm saying I understand it's a combination of a lot of different things. I was considering other people in the room and watching as well. We could get super freaking nerdy on that. But what I'm saying is,
please don't.
Please do. Please do.
No.
But what I'm saying is to just say that God did it is not a sufficient answer for science.
May I respond to that, guys?
Yes. Absolutely.
All right, so there's a lot that I actually want to say about this. The first thing is I think that the issue that I have with abiogenesis is that the ideas that people have regarding abiogenesis, as if life can develop through simple chemical reactions, is the way that people thought over 100 years ago.
True, there's a lot of noise coming from your.
Yeah, you got a lot of background noise, True. It's kind of hard to hear what you're.
You don't like puppies and trains?
Yeah. There's a train in the back. Can you hear me better?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, that's better.
Better now.
Okay. Yeah. So my issue that I have with abiogenesis is that it's the thought process seems to be the same as people had over 100 years ago. That the cell is some sort of simple piece of jelly that can be be produced through simple chemical reactions. And I think that the issue that we're having here is the one that I'm bringing up about intelligent design. There are systems inside of nature that seem to only be able to come about through intelligent. And we have never observed the laws of physics and chemistry on their own producing these systems. Every time we see the laws of physics and chemistry operating in such ways, like these machines that I'm bringing up, is when an intelligence has set these components in motion for them to start acting upon each other. I mean, even going down back to her description of how ATP molecules can be simply formed. I go back to the point that I was bringing up earlier. Before the ATP synthase molecule is produced, there's a glycolysis reaction where you have an enzymatic breakdown of glucose. And at the very start of a hydrolysis reaction, ATP molecules are transferred to, they transfer their energy to a glucose molecule to form a 6-carbon sugar diphosphate molecule. And then this will lead to the flavin adenine dinucleotide and a whole bunch of chemical reactions that will reach the Krebs cycle. So before you can even get this proton movement to go through, all these complex structures along the mitochondrial matrix, you need an ATP molecule before it. So you got a sort of chicken and egg problem. This ATP molecule is a very complex. I mean, a lot of people try to bring up the ATP molecule because it's comparable to RNA. It's got a very similar structure to RNA and DNA. So maybe there's some sort of relation there. Again, you get into this chicken and egg problem like many other systems, like I was bringing up earlier with chemical reactions inside of with the peripheral nervous system or central nervous system. You need ATP to operate there with the brain. You need ATP with many different systems. So it's not that you can just sit, just get it to develop steadily. It seems like these systems need to all be there at once. And I don't think that saying, well, because they're chemicals, that's really a sufficient answer to say, well, you know what, therefore abiogenesis is a legit idea to hold to. I don't know how that follows, because it's to me it's sort of just undermining how complex the cell is.
Okay, which of you two would like to tackle that?
All I've got to say is, with this logic, anything that a scientist does in the lab at this point, he's going to say, well, God did it because we are intelligent beings and we replicated it in the lab, which means God did it. So, I mean, that's what I got out of that entire
No. I think, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's not at all what I'm saying. Here's what my position is on this. It's not that God did it. I'm not going that far yet as to say God anything. See, I'm saying that.
Well, I mean, that's intelligent design as God did it. Hold on a second.
Hold on, let me finish my thought. No, intelligent design doesn't necessarily try to argue for a God. That's not true. That's why you have ID proponents that might support intelligent design that do not even believe in a God. But the only argument that I'm trying to make here is that based on what we're observing with these systems inside of nature, it is not a matter of opinion. It is not a matter of religious faith. It is not a matter of God. It is fact that every single time we have observed a turbine being produced and the patterns that go around of the functionality of a turbine, an intelligent agent has always been behind it. So that's not saying we don't know, therefore God did it. It's no God of the gaps argument. It's based on our uniform experience. We appeal to causality, cause and effect. So the problem here is that it seems to me that we reject this known cause that can produce this system, this natural phenomena that we're seeing inside of nature, and we're putting this on the shelf for an idea like abiogenesis, which can't account for it. I mean, we do not know if the laws of physics and chemistry on their own can lead up to and establish a system like the cell or any of the systems within it. So, I mean, I think that's the issue that we have here. I am holding to intelligent design as the account for these systems inside of nature, because it is the only one based on cause and effect that is legit. And no scientist, and I'm going to have to challenge you on this, there is not a single scientist out there that would agree with you on the statement that the something like the ATP synthase has been produced through the mechanisms of evolution, or that abiogenesis has shown or proven that life can come about from non-life through inanimate substances arranging on their own and producing this. As the other scientists were saying in here, it's a very difficult question. There's a whole lot of problems with it. There's holes inside of this theory, or this idea. It's not even a theory that I'm very confident you wouldn't deal with here.
Okay.
Can I raise an issue
Sure.
about something you just said? True. You said that, I heard you say that the only turbines that we know about were designed by an intelligent agent, the turbines that we see around. And this is a turbine, so it must have come from an intelligent agent. But that logic would say that anything that we find in life that looks like something that we ourselves build must come from an intelligent agent. And I find that logic.
That was my argument.
I think that's kind of flawed logic because, there are things in living cells that we don't have anything that we've ever made equivalent to. A lot of people say, well, DNA is like a code. So, since we developed software, which is a code, DNA is like that. Therefore, DNA must have come from a designer. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. And I don't really get that logic because, there's just because we have done something as intelligent agents doesn't mean that only intelligent agents can do that thing. You see what I'm saying?
See, that was my argument. I agree with you there, Si.
True.
Okay. So, this doesn't say, what I'm saying doesn't say yes or no that either the ATP synthase or the translation system for making proteins, that any of those things are intelligently designed or not intelligently designed, because the analogy thing, just that's not good science. Okay.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
I was talking earlier and I didn't realize I muted myself, so I apologize.
No, we can hear you.
I was actually trying to respond. So yeah, that's what my issue is actually. I think that what we need to understand here is that this is the exact argument that you would get from ID proponents, and people can go check the website to see if what I'm saying is actually accurate. Certain patterns in nature are best explained by an intelligent cause because those patterns have been observed coming from an intelligent agent. Certain patterns in nature. So I wouldn't be able to say, you're right, that everything inside of nature or everything inside of this cell is the end result of an intelligent agent. There are certain issues, for example, I brought up the brain earlier, where I believe I could make an argument, but that's not something necessarily like the brain. There's a disagreement among neurologists and people who deal with the brain as to whether or not you can compare it to our own technology, because with the brain with the brain, it doesn't have a random access memory CPU motherboard like you have with an actual computer. The systems are not the same, but it's comparable. It's analogous to a computer of sorts. But with the ATP synthase, we can point out this specific pattern, this specific machine, because the parts overall are the same. The overall purpose, it is what it is. It's a turbine. It's not a matter of opinion. That is what it is. So there's a difference. You can look at certain patterns inside of nature and point out which ones are better utilized as an argument from design, because based on a uniform experience, it's not a matter of opinion or belief or religious faith. It is fact that those systems have come from an intelligent agent. So I would agree with you. We cannot sit over here and point out anything or everything inside of the cell, but it's very clear that there are certain patterns in nature that there has never been an observation of the laws of physics and chemistry on their own, producing these systems and establishing them. Meanwhile, there is a known cause, which is intelligence. That's what makes the ID argument superior. And it seems to me that in response, if I know I'm being a bit long-winded here, so if you want to butt in, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that the problem with inferring design from what you're looking at is that you can make a lot of mistakes. You can look at many natural phenomena or random phenomena that people do and say, wow, that really looks designed, but in fact it's not at all. It's just a random phenomenon. And you can look at biology at any level and say, wow, this must be designed because look how well everything works. The fox is able to smell the rabbit is able to run away. Everybody's well designed for where they are, but that's an appearance of design. And we kind of know how that appearance of design developed. Now, I'm not saying there's no such thing as design, because I do believe in God. I believe that God created the universe and everything in it. And I believe in design in a theological sense. But when we talk about scientifically trying to understand life's diversity, design actually can be easily overtaken by evolutionary principles, especially if we look at modern evolution and not just, as I said before, the limited way that people used to think about evolution. And it will look like design because it works well. But one important part of this, and this has been said by quite a few evolutionary biologists, one of the key things that tells us that it's probably not design is all the mistakes, all the things that don't really work very well. And why would they be there if everything was designed, let's say, by us? I mean, when humans design something, they have mistakes, but then they fix them, and usually they come out pretty good. We don't see that in biology. We see all kinds of things that don't work. Like, for example, my back doesn't work very well. And, it would have been nice if we had been designed to be able to, deal with back pain. So
I got a lot to say. To say.
Go ahead, say it.
The first thing that you were bringing up about things that might look or appear to be designed. This is one of the problems that I actually have with evolutionary theory that I don't think intelligent design does, where it's just comparable to pareidolia or apathenia, you pattern seek. Just like I was bringing up earlier with these homologous proteins with the hexameric helicases or the whatever other established homology that people would like to point out, compare it to the ATP synthase. You can look at them and they might be comparable in genes or in stature, but just because you can imagine an evolutionary process leading up to with these complexities, it doesn't mean that therefore necessarily there is a common ancestor that's shared. And with intelligent design, I don't think it does that. It's not that when we're looking at a pattern. I mean, you even brought up codes with DNA. Or we're looking at specifically the ATP synthase and its functionality, how it operates, and its overall purpose tends to be for energy utilization for the cell. That pattern is direct. It's direct. That pattern is observed coming from an intelligent agent, so we can draw that inference. It doesn't appear this way. It doesn't seem to be this way. It is this way. And you mentioned something earlier. I just forgot what you said. It's really important that I wanted to hit on. Oh yeah, you were talking about bad design. Your back hurts you, and things that were going wrong inside of life and malfunctioning. Well, my car that I have in the back, it's got the battery in the trunk, and it's also powered electrically, and it's got two different keys. So when I can't get when I don't have any power in it, I can't even open the trunk to get the thing charged. So it's a pretty stupid design. But the problem is that we know that bad design does not therefore equal not design, right? Just because something is bad, we know for a fact that the car was created because of its pattern, because based on a uniform experience, cars have always come from an intelligent agent, right? So with this car, it might be badly designed. The people who made it weren't too bright, but we still know that it was created. So, I mean, I don't think that saying that something inside of nature is malfunctioning is necessarily an argument to say, well, therefore this thing was not created because, again, based on our understanding, when we appeal to our understanding of the past, we still know that bad design still for equals design. That doesn't discredit anything. So, yeah, that's my answer, I guess.
Okay. Sire Melody.
Yes.
Don't jump her once.
I'm sorry, guys. I know you guys can hear these pups in the background. They're really distracting. I can't really do anything about it. So I'll try to keep myself muted.
It's okay. It is what it is.
You had a question, Kyle?
I was just asking which one of you wanted to respond back to that.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Well, I mean, where
okay, I'm just if we're going to use intelligent design for the reason why things like that are intricate complex systems that generate life and keep us going. We cannot use the same argument when everything falls apart too. It's problematic. Why would an intelligent designer make something? Okay, ATP synthase, enzymes, all of these fabulous things. We have conserved DNA in every living thing on the planet, in regards to cellular respiration and these other things. We have all this, important processes that have occurred, but everything else has lots of problems. So clearly somebody designed it. That doesn't make any kind of sense to me whatsoever, because people are flawed, because we make things that are problems and they fall apart, but yet there's an intelligent designer that managed to make us breathe air and do all of these things. That part works, but everything else is going to pot. So it just, that whole argument is flawed, because why would an intelligent designer make so many perfect things and then go, I'm just gonna let it run and fall to pieces, and then I'm not, because it's all broken after that.
Good question. Sai, why would he do that?
Yeah, I don't.
No,
hold on, True. Let's go aside and then we'll come back to you.
Maybe I wasn't clear. That's exactly was my point.
No, I meant with true empiricism.
Yeah, I think she was agreeing with Sai. I think
I'm agreeing with you, Sai. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
True empiricism. There's that whole logic just falls.
We've had mass extinctions. We've had species. 99% of every species that has ever survived.
Hold on, Mel. Let's let Sai.
No, I'm agreeing with Sai.
And I'm agreeing with Mel. 99% of all species that ever lived are gone. And it doesn't even have to be a mass extinction. Extinctions happen all the time. So, this actually part of evolutionary theory sort of says that. So if you're postulating that evolution occurs by design, and I usually hear things like, the eye or bacterial flagella, or things that are a little bit beyond the stage of the early cell. We find that there are good evolutionary explanations for adaptations for all of these structures, and the idea of irreducible complexity, which sounds good, is really, no one has been able. You talk about evolutionists. I'm now speaking to true empiricism. You say that evolutionists don't have any good way to explain how these things happen. But intelligent design has even less of a explanatory model, other than to say there's a designer. But even if I accept it, and in some cases I actually do when you talk about very early life, but when I accept a designer, I still want to know how that happened. Okay, if you see a car and you say, well, that was built, that was designed, I don't know about you, but I'm curious as to who designed it and how. And if, in fact, it is true that God or some designer, whoever, maybe it's some alien somewhere, designed life, I would like to know how, because there still has to be a mechanism by which the design occurred. And so it's not an answer at all to say, well, that must be an intelligent design because it's whatever. We see it everywhere. We're intelligent. We design things. We know how we design things. We have no clue how the intelligent designer designed anything. I actually think I do know how the intelligent designer designed everything, and that is with evolution. Because evolution is an incredibly brilliant design tool. Evolutionary principles are being used in software development. Genetic algorithms are basically random changes in software followed by natural selection to determine which program actually works, and programmers are using this, engineers are using this all the time. So evolution was a brilliant design strategy, if you want to look at it that way. That, you can or don't have to, one way or the other, evolution is the true way that biology diversifies.
Well, you guys are mentioning a lot of things. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys are mentioning a lot of things right now. I'm going to do my best to respond to everything that I heard right now. The responses that you guys gave me at the beginning, I have to say I feel that they are very poor responses, because the fact is that regardless of whether you think it's a good explanation, it is a fact that mechanisms inside, based on reality, based on what we see in the physical, the fact is that things that we know are designed, they malfunction. So even if we can point out inside of nature things that look like they're malfunctioning, things that look like they're going wrong, the fact still is true, and it still logically follows that bad design does not therefore equal not design. And we know this as fact. Cars that malfunction, satellites that malfunction, any machine that we have observed, turbines that malfunction, motors that go down, that break down, it doesn't matter that they break down. That doesn't therefore tell us that they weren't designed. So it doesn't follow to say, well, things in nature that are going wrong, that are malfunctioning, that are depleting in stature, that somehow therefore this means that they were not designed. There's no argument there. Now we can add additional premises to the scientific argument that I'm trying to make of design, and try to make a philosophical argument or theological argument by assuming the motives. Is this an all-powerful God or creator? Is this, did he, what was his motives behind it? These are additional premises that you guys would be adding into the argument that I'm trying to present to you, which is a totally secular argument. It's not with a religious basis, even though the implications of intelligent design may be religious friendly. You guys get what I'm trying to say there? Intelligent design itself doesn't argue for a God, but if the implications inside of science show us that design is more than likely the cause, obviously, if design is true, the implications is going to be religious friendly. So I think you guys are trying to sort of add motives maybe to the design arguments by assuming Christianity and so on. So you guys were mentioning something earlier. Can you bring that up again about mechanisms? Yeah, right. That's what it was. You guys were bringing up mechanisms of design. The issue that I have here is that this is what I was bringing up actually when I opened up in this hangout. There is no observed mechanisms in evolutionary theory or in abiogenesis which has accounted for or have produced any system that I have mentioned thus far, specifically the ATP synthase. Now, there are mechanisms posited, but there are no mechanisms that have ever shown that these systems have been produced or can be produced. And I think that that's a big problem there. And where you guys have no mechanism, intelligent design does have a mechanism. Now, what is the mechanism of intelligent design? The mechanism of intelligent design would be intelligence. And why would I say that it would be intelligence? Because it is the driving force that is producing these systems. But if you remove the intelligence, what do you have? You have inanimate nothing. Look at my body, for example. If you remove my ability to think, my hands are a non-physical, they have no ability to arrange things inside of nature. And likewise, you have the same problem with the laws of physics and chemistry on their own. They are a non-thinking process that do not have the ability to have a deterministic foresight to understand that after the substance is produced through whatever chemical reactions, that substance can then be arranged through the laws of physics and chemistry to produce an established system of some kind. That attribute is only known to come from an intelligent creator, and the laws of physics and chemistry, we don't know that. It's posited, it's declared, but there's no demonstration at all that the laws of physics and chemistry can produce the same systems.
I got to break in for a second because you said something that I really have to respond to. You said that there's no mechanism by which evolution can produce anything. And that's simply not true. I mean, we know all the mechanisms by which evolution produces single-celled organisms that are very complex, multicellular organisms, plants, animals with nervous systems, animals with vertebrae, on to mammals, on to us. I mean, all of those mechanisms are known. It's simply untrue to say that evolution provides no mechanisms. The mechanisms are clear. And in many cases, we know exactly what genes were mutated in what way, or changed in what way, or what genes were amplified and then changed to provide new kinds of information. We know exactly how natural selection works. This has been done both in the field and in the laboratory. We have all the evidence of fossils to back this up. There isn't any lack of mechanism in evolutionary biology. I don't know how you could say that.
Well, I think the problem. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
Well, I think the problem is that there are definitely mechanisms that are posited, but there's no articles out there that have ever tested those mechanisms to see if these systems can actually be produced. It's posited, but there's no test out there at all for any of these mechanisms producing any system like the ATP synthase. They don't exist. There's a lot of mechanisms. You're right. Horizontal.
Do you have anything else outside of ATP synthase? I mean, for real, you say that all the time. Do you have anything else outside of that?
Well, that really doesn't matter if I do, but yeah. I mean,
it kind of does matter if you do, because you keep using the same argument. Does it not matter, Cy? I think it matters.
Of course it matters. I've been saying it over and over again. I mean,
that's not an argument.
You like the ATP synthase. I like the protein, translation synthesis system. They're both early systems in the origin of life. We have to get away from that if we're going to talk about evolution. And usually when people talk about intelligent design, they divide it into two things. They talk about intelligent design for the origin of life. That's one subject. Okay, and then they talk about intelligent life in evolution, and that's another subject.
Well, okay, let me respond really quick.
Hold on, True. Hold on.
Yeah.
Let him finish. Let him finish his thought, and then we'll give you enough time. He doesn't interrupt.
I was actually cut short there, guys.
I had things to say, but I shall wait.
Hold on, everybody, calm down. Everybody, calm down. We're gonna let everybody talk. I promise. We have not interrupted in any way, shape, or form. But people can't follow along with everybody jumping on top of everybody. Cy, was your thought finished there?
Yes.
And True, if we cut you off there, that was not our intention. So, go ahead with what's your thought, and then Mel, we'll let you go right after that to respond to what he's going to say now. Okay.
Questions after that.
Good.
Well, I mean, okay. Well, I'll go right now. I think that wasn't even a response really that I heard from Mel saying, "Well, could you talk about?" And we can talk about other stuff if you want to. I have no problem with that at all. But I would like to hear intelligent responses to my things that I'm bringing up. Saying that I bring up the ATP synthase a lot isn't an argument. And yes, it is a relevant topic if that system has a pattern that has only been known to come from an intelligent agent. Now, people are saying here again and again and again that we do have mechanisms that, chemistry can do this, that, or the other, but I've not seen any evidence for that. I can show many articles which will describe ATP synthase in secular mainstream journals, none of them coming from creationist journals, that describe the ATP synthase exactly how I'm talking about. It's not my opinion. This is fact. So the issue here is that I'm hearing, people like Mel say, well, your argument is poopy because I hear it a lot and you talk about it a lot. Well, that's fine. We can talk about something else. You want to talk about the complexity of the brain? We can get into that as well. But I would like to hear a refutation regarding the argument, a scientific refutation regarding a scientific argument that I am attempting to present to you. So, I mean, again, I've not heard a refutation. I've heard people claim that mechanisms of evolution can produce these systems. But if there is an actual test in the laboratory where you can show me a published article utilizing the mechanisms of evolution to produce these systems, not some irrelevant system that I'm not talking about, then I would like for you guys to put it here on the table so that we can read through it. And if you want to talk about something else, I mean, we can talk about the complexity of the brain. There's a very powerful argument.
Well, before you do that, Drew, I don't mean to cut you off.
First, refute the first argument.
Can she respond to what you said first, and then we'll come to the complexity of the brain? Give her a chance to respond about you saying that she has not presented a refutation to that claim.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Good. Okay, go ahead now.
First of all, he's not presented any evidence at all outside of his own personal perspective. I'll just preempt anything I say with that. He's talking to a PhD biochemist that's telling him he's wrong, and he disagrees with him. Anything that I say, he's going to disagree with. So I'm not really going to refute so much as trying to present something to refute what he says, because it's not going to matter. So I'm not going to get in a circular argument there. What I will say, I'll go back to his argument where he said that people design things and things fall apart. Somebody in the chat, I believe it was Fred, and I want to give a little props to Fred on this, The difference between your ID thought in regards to people designing things is that people actually try to fix the stuff. They don't just leave their car dead. They'll go and try to fix it, or they'll get a new one. Two cars can't get together and make brand new baby cars. That's not how that works either.
I'm sorry.
I'm talking.
Hold on
You're
one second.
You're gonna listen to me this time,
Just,
TE.
Let's
Mel,
please.
I didn't hear that. Can you repeat
Let's all
that?
chill.
He's just asking you to repeat it because he didn't hear it. Breathe, Mel. Breathe. It's okay. Deep breaths.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, you're using this argument where since people can make things and that means things break down, and so that means intelligent design can happen because things break down. The thing is that's different between people and your argument there is that people actually try to fix the things. We try to fix the things that go wrong. We try to go and fix the cars. We fix the people that are sick. We go and fix the things. I'm going to give a little props to Fred Knotts over there because that's a valid argument. So when you sit there and you're like, intelligent design happened and things can fall apart, and that means that's okay. But you're basing this on humans sitting here saying we make things and then they fall apart. We don't just leave it there. We continue to try to fix it. That's not what's going on with your perspective in regards to intelligent design.
May I respond briefly?
And for you to sit here and say that you're waiting for me to have an intelligent response to you when I've said before, you have a guy with a PhD in biochemistry. I have 4 degrees. I don't have a PhD in that, but I do have, substantial background in this, but that's fine. But for me to address any of what you've said with some kind of refutation, when you haven't actually provided any evidence outside of your personal perspective.
May I respond?
Yes. That's
briefly.
How can I have a productive discussion with you? That's kind of my thought in all this, because it's just going to be circular arguments, and you're just going to say I'm wrong.
Go ahead. Let T respond, and then I have a couple questions.
I'll try to respond as briefly as I can, as quickly as I can. So perhaps maybe you don't understand. Maybe I should clarify a little further. Science is dependent on certain lines of reasoning, induction or abduction. The argument that I'm trying to present to you is an abductive argument. To disregard what I'm saying to you, you would have to throw science out the window itself, because I'm not simply just saying, I don't know, therefore God did it. I'm not just making opinionated assertions. It is an inference that I'm trying to give to you. And to disregard the inference is to disregard science. That's not a matter of opinion. That's just fact. Now, the issue that I'm having here with you, again, is that none of the information that I'm talking about is coming from myself. I'm in contact on a regular basis with PhDs in marine biology, like Dr. Robert Carter. Dr. Robert Carter. I have emails all over the place. Now, here's the issue here. We can talk about papers. We can get into them. But with all due respect, I'm very questionable. I definitely do have to question your supposed degrees, because the comments that you just praised there is an ignorant comment, because actually the DNA code.
No, is it because I'm a woman?
I don't think that's.
TE, I do believe you had comments in the past where
I don't think you should finish.
I don't think you should. That's incorrect.
Can I finish my thought, please? You're just being rude.
Listen. We're not going to go into a direction where we're questioning anybody's degrees.
Absolutely.
There's no reason to question their qualifications.
Listen. We're going to debate on the science of the issue and not the persons. Stick to the ideas.
Okay.
I don't want this to go into the gutter. I think that so far both sides have done well about being respectful and communicating with each other, and I'd like to keep it that way and not turn it into a shit show. So let's leave the person, let's not take it personal. It's just a discussion on science and what we think happened when we came into existence. That's all. Let's keep it.
Well, I was just going to say the reason why I went that. I apologize if I offended anybody. It's just she made a very curious statement there. Why would she praise that comment? Because it was an ignorance comment. By the very definition, whoever made that comment that she just praised, by the very definition of ignorance, they're unlearned, uneducated, and uninformed.
Well,
DNA.
I understand.
Can I finish my thought?
But let's keep it. Let's keep it to the science. Let's stay on.
I'm trying to do that now. I'm trying to do that.
Well, saying somebody's comment is ignorant,
like everybody else
is
is
the
making
science.
ridiculous
Okay.
that is just
now we've been very respectful with you. Okay, and I'd like to keep it that way. But saying somebody's comment is ignorant is not keeping it to the science. Let's keep it to the task at hand and move on. Like, we don't have to dwell on this. Let's go.
The comment was uninformed because of this reason. The DNA code is a 3 out of 4 error correcting code. The cell is made out of multiple different is built on multiple different mechanisms like apoptosis, which will trigger cell death to help protect the cell. There are many mechanisms inside of the cell that protects, corrects, and helps to fix the cell whenever something goes wrong, or to protect it from future harm. So to make that comments to me is just a very silly comment. And on top of it, it didn't really matter. The comment didn't really matter anyways, because it didn't touch the arguments. I mean, the fact still is, if you don't have, based on cause and effect, if you don't have a system being fixed, like a car fixing itself, and it's still malfunctioned, the fact still is based on cause and effect, understanding that the thing has broken down does not lead us to the conclusion that the car was therefore not built. So the comment is a very silly comment.
Well,
and
to be clear, True, I don't think they were meaning just about a cell. I think it was just a general comment about when people see things that are broken, they fix them. I don't think it was honing in on the cell. So that's what I'm saying. Let's not get bogged down on the analogy that came from the live chat. Let's focus on what we.
No, I was responding to Mel. I was responding to Mel because what Mel was saying was very silly. She was wrong.
I understand. Look, True, we're on this. True, listen, I understand that's what you were doing. I have acknowledged that's what you were doing. Now, let's move on further into the conversation and leave this aspect of it behind.
I'm responding to her comments. That's all I'm doing.
You've made your point. Do you have anything else to say about the comment?
Just like everybody else was responding to my comments, I was trying to respond to hers.
But they're not they're not questioning, like they're not asking you what your credentials are. That's my point. Like they've not once said, True, why are you an authority to speak on this behalf? They've been very respectful of you, and for you to say that about their degree was really disrespectful. They did not do that to you, so let's keep it civil.
Well, Kyle, they actually just did. In response, instead of giving me an intelligent response, her response was, well, we have a PhD in here that disagrees with you, so blah, blah. You know, I mean, that's not an answer.
Well, she wasn't calling you out.
Her argument, though. To be fair, hang on. To be fair, I got to interject at this point. To be fair, that was not her argument. That was not what she was trying to say by that. Her point was saying no matter what he says or she says to you at this point, it becomes circular argumentation because you don't seem to have a refutation of what they're actually saying, right?
Okay,
and
that's not true.
That's kind of what, but that's what
I got emails with Dr. Robert Garte.
Whether it's true or not, that's what her argument was. It wasn't trying to say you don't have a PhD. Biology.
Okay, it was a cheap shot remark because she wasn't able to make an intelligent response.
That wasn't,
come on, guys.
That wasn't a cheap shot. That wasn't what she was going with that.
No, that's not what I was saying at all.
Can we all agree to move on from this?
Let me ask a couple questions because I think this is kind of on point, and I think Sai would probably agree on when it comes to abductive arguments. It's best a hypothesis, either the explanation or the reason for something, but it's always based upon prior observations. We've never seen a disembodied mind ever create anything. And also, when we're talking about an explanation for something from a reductionist approach, saying a causal agent did something in science is not an explanation. If you do a painting, the explanation that a man painted it is a basic explanation, but it's not a scientific explanation. We want to know about the mechanism, the physics. We want to know the basal things of the science of how things occur. So when we're talking about things like biochemistry or biology and the explanation of why life's here, as far as the biochemistry, God is not a positive explanation. One, we all agree it falls outside methodological naturalism, but even as an intelligent agent, it is a non-explanation. It doesn't explain anything, because then you have to get into, well, what was the mechanism by which that intelligent designer created that thing? That's the key. That's what science is looking for.
That's what I just answered.
And you're missing that huge step, I think, by positing, okay, there's an intelligent designer. Great. What was his mechanism? Until you have that mechanism by which he did it, I don't see it as an extra
answered you. I think I literally just answered that statement.
Did you? Okay, well.
Yes, I did.
What's the mechanism the causal agent, the intelligent agent?
The mechanisms of an intelligent agent is intelligence. And the reason why I said that, I can feel like someone's about to interrupt me again. So the issue, the reason why it's intelligence is because intelligence is the driving force. That is the mechanism of how things are built. That's the reason why. To sit over here and say that there are mechanisms of evolutionary theory or abiogenesis that can produce these things, it seems like we're avoiding that completely. No one has given an answer. They've talked about it, but no one has produced any article at all that can suggest that the mechanisms of evolution can build these systems. But with intelligence is a mechanism. It is the driving force that can produce these systems. You remove that driving force, you don't have anything that can build it. So that's the reason why intelligence.
Right.
There is a gigantic literature on mechanisms of how evolution builds structures. I mean, it's huge. I don't even know where to start. There are about 8 journals that you could look at that do nothing but that. So,
well, can you give me a link? Can you give me a link here on the side?
Let me throw this out here real quick. We have given actual links on ATP synthase of how each segment, each part of ATP synthase comes about from what gene and how that gene came about. We have done that multiple times.
I know.
Wait, let me finish, please. Let me finish what I please. You have said there's no precursors for ATP synthase. You've said that we have no mechanism. We've given all those papers multiple times. And let me ask Sai here. How can intelligence be a mechanism for anything? That doesn't even remotely, to me, imply a mechanism. Mechanism is how something is caused from A to B, how you get something done. That's a mechanism.
I just want to note that I never said
intelligence is not a mechanism.
I want to note that I did not say anything that you just mentioned. And if people replay this, actually what I said was there are a lot of comparisons that are offered, like the hexameric helicases and other organisms, other complex biochemical, operations as well that they might try to compare. So the issue isn't that there are articles out there that are comparing homologies with already existing systems. That's what you can compare. You can compare the genes too. That's what you're going to find in these articles. And if we're not going to find that, we can read through an article here on spot, just share it for us. And I guarantee anybody in this room that is exactly what we're going to find, because I'm not just talking about this because I'm, just feel like saying this. I've read through all of these articles. As far as I'm aware of it, there could be more articles out there maybe that deal with the ATP synthase, and every article out there that tries to talk about the evolution of the ATP synthase is typically trying to compare homologies in genes or in proteins, and that's not what I'm looking for, as I've been very, very clear inside of this room. And now to the I don't know what your name is, sir. The
Dr. Garte.
Yeah.
Sai is fine.
Yeah. So the issue that I'm having with you, and I think that most of what you said here I've been in agreement with, but the issue that I'm having with you here is that with the idea of there being all these articles out there in defense for the mechanisms of evolutionary theory or of abiogenesis, whatever mechanisms, horizontal gene transfer, vertical gene transfer, I don't care what mechanism you want to posit, any mechanism, I don't care. Whatever mechanisms you want to posit that has sources behind it, I would like to read through them here if we can, because of the fact that none of those mechanisms that you're going to offer are going to be able to support the idea that the ATP synthase has been produced through gradual steps or processes via these mechanisms of evolution. So that's the issue that I'm having here, is that we can posit mechanisms all day long and imagine what they could do, but has there actually been tests in the laboratory showing that the mechanisms of evolution can produce a system like the ATP synthase over time?
So I go ahead and
respond. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, so I go ahead and respond, but let me throw that out there that addressed nothing of what I just said. Literally, everything you just said was completely irrelevant to what I was just saying.
Well, what you said,
before we
clarify,
we're getting derailed again. We're getting derailed again. He asked Sai a question. Sai, go ahead and answer.
Well, actually, I threw
it
it out there first. He responded, but it wasn't a response to actually what I was talking about, because again, we have explanations of all the precursors that are involved in making ATP synthase. We can show how it came to be by naturalistic explanations.
Well, really quickly, guys, I got to take off in a bit.
Go ahead, Si.
Really quickly.
Okay, well, let's answer your question and then we'll let you go.
I'm a little stunned, frankly. There are a number of things that you were in your question, I guess. One of the things you threw out there was you don't know of any laboratory experiments. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I might have misunderstood. You don't know of any laboratory experiments that have shown evolutionary mechanisms. Is that what you're? Is that a fair restatement? Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's make it clear. The reason I was pretty much clear. Just I want to run through this really quick because I do have to leave in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
What he said earlier, Steve, what he said earlier, my response was to clarify a misrepresentation of what I had said earlier. So it was a clarification of what he said earlier. Just go back to anybody who's listening to what I was been mentioning throughout the hangout. You'd understand why. But the issue that I'm having with you, Doctor, is that I believe that there are real world phenomena attached to the mechanisms that are posited by evolutionists. Vertical gene transfer happens, mutations happen.
Okay.
Many of these other mechanisms, they do happen. And I hope I'm going to be as clear as I can here. Many of these mechanisms, they do happen. They're real world phenomena. But the end result of these mechanisms producing a system like the ATP synthase have never been observed to happen. Right. So what I see inside of the articles, they exist. They are real. The mechanisms are real. But the idea behind the ATP synthase being produced through evolutionary mechanisms doesn't show any real world product. You get what I mean? What we see inside of these articles are a comparison between genes or homologous proteins. So this is the issue that I'm having here. It's the exact issue that I think that you guys are guilty of. You guys brought this up earlier. I think it was you that brought it up. This idea of pareidolia or epithenia, this pattern seeking. You can look in the clouds, for example, and see faces in the clouds and cars in the clouds. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually faces or clouds or cars in the sky, right? You were trying to use that as a response to intelligent design.
Right.
You were trying to, yeah. So I think that that's exactly what we're seeing with evolutionary theory, is that there are mechanisms posited, but no mechanism that has been posited has ever in the real world demonstrated. And if there's an article out that exists, I'd like to see it. I've looked through many of these articles and run through them with different scientists, and no article that I've ever seen has ever tested any mechanism to see if an ATP synthase can be developed. So that's
are you familiar with whole genome duplication and gene amplification and those phenomena?
Yes.
So gene amplification is a very important mechanism in evolution because it allows for a great deal of experimentation, so to speak, within the cell of different forms of mutation without killing the organism, because the functional gene is still active. So the organism is fine, but meanwhile, it allows for a large number of experimental, so you could put it, within the cell itself. We don't have to do the experiment. The cell is doing the experiment. And those experiments, most of them fail terribly and the cell dies, which doesn't matter because it's one cell of a large population or even one cell in a body. So it doesn't matter if one or if a whole bunch of cells dies, but one experiment may turn out very good, and you end up with a selective advantage because that cell or that organism now has a much better chance of survival and giving rise to offspring. So experimentation goes on all the time within living organisms. And in terms of the laboratory, I mean, I've done it. I mean, almost every molecular biologist I know has taken cells and mutated them and grown them, and seeing most of them die and a few colonies remain. It's a trivial laboratory experiment in the biological world. And of course, that's called microevolution, which it is, but it's the mechanism by which evolution functions. It's experiment, it's try things, it's make changes in DNA sequence, and then by natural selection, find out which ones survive, and that's how evolution occurs. So the mechanism is clear. It's very well known, and the basic mechanism, and now we're getting more mechanistic information, and this has been done by laboratory experiments, by observations in the field, and it all fits together. So the idea that no mechanism has been postulated or produced in papers. Now, I know what you're saying. The majority of papers in evolutionary biology will probably refer to things like, well, this gene is homologous to that gene with a slight change. That's true. That's true. There are many, many papers like that because those are the areas that people are interested in investigating. And what you have to remember about science is that no scientist goes into a lab, by the way, as an example, with the idea of doing an experiment that will prove or disprove evolution or find the origin of life or anything like that. A scientist goes in the laboratory to find out whether or not by changing this amino acid in this particular protein, you change the Km of the protein. That's a typical laboratory experiment by a scientist. It means absolutely, has very little meaning to most of the rest of the world. But that's how science works, by very small steps of discovery. So the majority of papers are boring. Yes, that's true. But it doesn't mean that there are no papers, and they're usually in review articles, actually. That's where you have to look to understand what's going on. If you want to understand what's happening in evolutionary biology, only look at review articles. They will tell you, and even the review articles may be very, very specific, but eventually you will find a review article that will explain what's actually happening, and they will give references to the papers, to maybe hundreds of papers that back up what the review article is saying. But each one of those hundreds of papers is going to put a little tiny piece of the puzzle together, either through an experiment or through some observation. So I would suggest, I can't send you any links right now at this moment because I'm almost asleep, but I can certainly send you, links to journals where, including review articles, which will cover lots of the areas of evolutionary biology. And there are also some good books as well.
Well, I don't want this to come off either. I know that it has come off a little bit confrontational here, but I would like for you to actually do that, because
I will.
I've had various people inside of some of my hangouts, and like I said, I am in contact with a lot of different people from different fields, and I seem to keep on coming to this conclusion. And some people that I talk to, they tell me, well, yeah, you know what, this is true, and depending if I'm speaking to an evolutionist, they'll give me, pretty much the same line, and I don't want to come off rude, but it's pretty much the same line that you gave me just now, and I don't feel like it's sufficient to be given a response that, well, there are a lot of articles out there, there is a lot of research, and you get this story of, well, what can happen with natural selection and mutation. I mean, to me, I get the storyline. I get what will happen with what people believe or suspect with evolution. Change happens. The undesirable traits, they're not going to be passed on and so on. But whether or not that story actually has real world impact, as in, well, the mechanisms can somehow, the mechanisms of evolution can somehow help to enforce the ideas or the suspicions of what will happen if you allow them to continue on. I mean, to me, that's just hearsay until I'm able to see something tangible. I mean, I've looked through. Let me put it like this. I mean, I've got folders and folders and folders on my computer through all of these different review articles, all these different published articles. And all of them are saying the same thing. There's nothing out there showing at all that the mechanisms of evolution have ever been tested to produce any system. I mean, we don't have to talk about just the ATP synthase. We can talk about the type of the circulatory system. We can talk about the thoracolumbar segments with the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system, and many other complex operations as well. Many of the systems, it seems like, they were not able to be accounted for by any mechanisms of evolution. There's just a comparison of anatomy or morphology or stature of some kind. And I would agree. I mean, I think that, like I was saying earlier, I mentioned this at the beginning of the hangout, so there was no confusion later on. Evolution is a fact. I agree with that. Change happens all the way to the extent of having certain chemical reactions or mutations to produce new traits. But I think the issue here is that new traits that we observe, becoming produced is different than seeing an established system. I mean, like, the reason why I'm mentioning the ATP synthase is just the ATP synthase alone. That's not what's just important there. You got 10 to 15 different protein subunits on the top of the shaft. In the catalytic core, you have the 3 alpha, 3 beta, and the gamma delta epsilon. Along that mitochondrial matrix, you have all these complex proteins, the NADHT hydrogenase, all of these complex proteins that all have to work with each other. So you don't just get to have the ATP synthase be produced. You've got to wait for all these other complex proteins along that mitochondrial matrix to interact with this chemical reaction with each other. I mean, evolution doesn't work that way. You get what I mean?
Let me interrupt for a sec, Drew, because what you're saying about the ATP synthase is true for almost every system in biology. There's nothing simple anywhere in a biological cell. So that's, everything that happens is highly complex and interacting with everything else. That's why we have this field called systems biology, which tries to make sense of that. It's not easy. It's not simple. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, my point there was just this, is that evolution is claiming that things are slowly developing over time, over millions of years. This is what's happening. But with the ATP synthase, why I'm bringing that up is because you have many different complex structures that are just embedded in that mitochondria, along the mitochondrial matrix, that all have to be there at once for the thing to function and to work properly. So, I mean, that's what I'm trying to say here. Evolution doesn't work that way. You're not supposed to get everything at once. So there's many examples like that. The thoracolumbar segments I know you guys could probably make a case where the complex, central nervous system or peripheral nervous system wouldn't develop until later on. But you see systems like that where just getting a nervous system to function properly wouldn't just depend on just nerve cells. I mean, nerve cells that have different synapses depend on other very complex cells, like astrocytes, to work in conjunction with those nerve cells. And those nerve cells are all numbered. I don't even know the number off the top of my head, numerously. So I mean, it seems like everything inside of the cell that is complex is dependent on other systems that are also complex within themselves. And many of these systems have certain patterns that, based on our uniform experience, tend to come from intelligent agents. Evolutionary theory doesn't make the claim that everything was there at once and everything evolved all at once at one thing. But it seems basic.
You're cutting out, True.
Somebody's cutting paper. It sounds
True,
like.
you're cutting out.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's what you would need, it seems like. It seems like with evolution claims that things slowly develop. But what you're seeing inside of the cell is that it would be impossible for things to slowly develop because there are multiple different complex structures that seem to be there needed for many functions. So I'll give you guys a last word. I got to take off.
Real quick,
I was going to say we're kind of coming to like a close point where we're talking past each other, I believe. I think both sides have made I think all the points that they can on this particular issue. Correct?
I do want to reiterate. I do want to clarify again. We have numerous papers that have shown how the various subunits of ATP came about. We have more papers about that I've sent out and I've read, and that Aaron Ross sent to me. Those papers exist. Anybody can go research them. So we know how ATP synthase evolved, molecularly evolved from precursors. There's no ambiguity there. We don't know. We do know. We can show how each protein came about from each gene even. And so I think Cy wanted to take the conversation prior to that kind of stuff, right? If I'm not mistaken, Cy, like if you have a discussion with Mel next time, you want to start prior to all that, correct? Because we already know that part of how that thing's developed, do we not?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a funny position because I'm totally opposed to this idea of intelligent design in evolution, as you've probably gathered from everything I said. But when we talk about abiogenesis, I'm not so sure, and I think it's an open question.
It's a different conversation, though.
It's a different conversation. That was what has been very frustrating to me, is that it's not the same conversation. And the ATP synthase is a very early system, which, frankly, if I ever hear ATPase again, I think I'm...
You just took the words right out of my mouth.
We call it ATP mayonnaise for a reason.
Time I heard ATP synthase.
It sounds like Charlie Brown talk.
It's
after
a very,
a while,
that's
man.
a good.
Really
that's a good note to end it on. That's a good note to end it on. We have. I think we have all made our points, and at this point, it's just going to be talk. It's been 2 hours. We're going to be talking past each other. So, True, Dr. Garte will. I guess we can give. Well, I don't have your email, True. Dr. Garte, if you'll give me those articles at some point, I'll make sure that you get those.
Absolutely.
If Mel wants to have something later on, I want to continue a conversation I was having here about glycolysis and the Krebs cycle and things of that nature, nerd out stuff. So, Mel, if you want to have that, I don't even care if it's tonight or whenever. I would love to be a part of that because I like nerding out stuff. I like learning about that kind of stuff. So
y'all nerd out. But thank you, True, for stopping by. Scientist Mel.
Sure.
There were so many words that I have no clue what they meant being thrown at me all night long that my brain is just short circuited, and it's good that I can get your names correct. But Dr. Cy, as always, a pleasure.
It was nice to talk to you, Dr. Cy. I'm so glad I got to talk to you finally. Hopefully we get to talk more next time. Yeah. Interact a bit more, because I feel like we didn't get to have enough of that.
Right.
And for last minute, I think this was a good. I was nervous in the beginning when when we were going. What time was it, Steve? That I messaged you. I was like, we have 45 minutes before we're supposed to be on air, and we still were planning the entire thing.
And I'm frantically talking to Mel. I'm like,
for like
trying to keep her in the loop. Yeah, I was like, Mel, just hang in there. We'll figure this out. She's like, you guys are a hot mess right now.
That's a good point. I would like to say thank you to True Science and also to Mel for showing up here at such a last minute. I mean, I've been thinking about this for the last week or whatever it was that we decided. But you two guys came over with very little time. And so I agree with our hosts that we really appreciate both of you for showing up. That's really nice.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Until next time, guys.
All right.
We'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock.
Good night.